Hi, my name is Jared Mello, and this is an episode of Everything Eccentric. Today I have a guest. Her name is Marlene Dublinksy, and she has quite the interesting story, going from being a physician's assistant, making 6 figures a year, to government assistance, and we're also going to touch on addiction and mental health issues too. But before I get into that, please do check out my book, Radical Self-Respect. It's on Amazon now via the Kindle version, and I will also be having the audiobook version of that out soon too, and I will include the links in the description for those things. But without any further ado, we're going to start chatting with Marlene here. So, how are you, Marlene?
Doing well today. Doing well, thank
Awesome.
you. I'm glad you came. I appreciate this.
My pleasure.
Thank you
My
for
pleasure.
asking.
This is a nice place you have here.
Very nice, very nice. It's renovated, historic renovated. It had been abandoned for a few years after an organization owned it, and then the Rescue Mission of Trenton took it over, and they renovated it with a grant.
So I found your story is very interesting to me because you've experienced so much. So I thought maybe first we could touch on mental health stuff and some addiction stuff that happened in your life. What could you tell me about those things, just to open it up?
Well, you never grow up thinking you're going to get into an addiction issue or you're going to have a mental health issue. But when I was little, I was bullied, and so I guess that was the trauma that led me to starting to use some marijuana for a start, and then getting into other addictions. And about the age of 25, I first started going to NA, but I had some relapses along the way, and I discovered a lot of it had to do with having bipolar disorder and not knowing how to do emotion regulation, which can cause relapse.
I see. So you've had bullying, and there's probably trauma from that as well, I'd imagine?
Right.
I know a lot of people that get bullied, because I was bullied in high school too. They say the effects are like a PTSD.
Yes.
Like effect.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe a CPTSD as well, which is chronic, post-traumatic stress disorder. And for me, what would happen is I would see groups of guys, even later on in life, years later, and I would get the same kind of feeling of uh-oh, are these guys all going to start making fun of me, etc. And those old feelings would resurface. And that's kind of how you know, though, you're not over it, right?
Or assuming automatically that they're not going to like you.
Yes.
Even before they even know you. Just making that kind of assumption. So I find that a lot of the trauma healing is learning to love yourself, learning to have compassion,
Right.
self-care.
So what was the bullying like for you? People bullied you in what age group?
Oh, yes. Well, I lived in New York till we were about 7, 8 years old. And then when I moved into Hillside, in 3rd grade it started. And it kind of kept up until 8th grade. Then I had a wonderful teacher in 8th grade, a math teacher, who kind of took me under his wing and saw my potential, and he got the kids to stop it. But then going into 9th grade in high school, we had to go to a different school. And it started up again, and then my family moved partway through 9th grade to South Jersey, and a lot of it stopped there. It didn't happen anymore.
Actually, a rough time to move, though, in life when you're 15 years old or right about to be a freshman in high school.
Right.
How'd you handle that? Being able to go to a new place, were you able to make friends, etc.?
Yeah, it worked out a lot better. I met friends, I had a group of friends I spent time with that I was comfortable with.
Okay.
And kids didn't quite out and out bully, so it was good.
I see. And how about your parents? Were they both of good health, or did they have their own kind of things going on?
They were older when they had me. My mother was 46, my father was 50. So everybody used to always ask me when I was little, are those your grandparents? And I couldn't understand, because to me I didn't see the difference.
Right.
But no, they stayed married, they modeled what a good healthy relationship and a good healthy marriage looks like. So I can't complain or say that my parents were a cause of trauma for me.
I see. And so when did you first start to notice the bipolar disorder symptoms?
I probably had them ever since I was younger, but I self-medicated them. But sometime around, in my 30s and 40s, I think
That later?
Yeah.
Okay, I can relate to that too, because I didn't really notice any of my bipolar type 2 symptoms until I was 28, 29. And I had been, at the time, I was still going to NA, and I wasn't doing no drugs, no drinking, no nothing. But for me, it was caffeine, etc. That would even just trigger it, because when your system's so sensitive like that.
I would get manic on caffeine, it's true, at that time.
Absolutely. Did you end up going on any medicines for bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I did. Initially, years ago, they did Depakote, but I had a sleep disorder at the time. I didn't realize it, sleep apnea. So I was always sleepy and overeating. So I went off that, and then they tried other meds a few years later. And I didn't quite accept the diagnosis in my 30s, but I finally did in my 40s.
I see. And what were you normally self-medicating with? What were your drugs that you were doing?
It would be marijuana, pills. I had a big Xanax problem in the 90s. So do things like that.
I know for a lot of people it's very difficult to diagnose mental illness until they're actually stopped using all drugs, because the symptoms of withdrawal and the actual being on drugs mimics a lot of mental health symptoms, right?
Exactly.
So did you get clean first and then get the diagnosis?
Yeah, that's basically how it happened.
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
Because I see that's what happens to a lot of people, where they might have an underlying depression, an underlying bipolar disorder, or perhaps even worse, like a personality disorder, but they can't get it diagnosed because they don't stop using drugs long enough. But that stopping drugs thing is so difficult that some people never get to that point.
Exactly.
So they can never even get to the second layer of like, okay, how are we going to take a look at this addiction issue? Or how are we going to take a look at this mental health issue? Because I can't stop the addiction.
It either masks it or mimics it. And there used to be a time when you could, I'm sorry about that, folks. There used to be a time where they would tell you, the client or the patient needs to be at least 90 days clean before making the diagnosis.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, and those were the days when they kept mental health separate from addictions. If you had a mental health issue, you couldn't get into a rehab. If it was an addiction issue, it was hard to get into a mental health facility. And then they put them together as dual diagnosis. But now I think they're diagnosing too soon. Somebody comes in, they're only a couple days off the drugs. The withdrawal symptoms could mimic the mental health issue. And so, I think they need to go back to really allowing some period of time.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think,
but unfortunately, a person will show up in a psych hospital or a rehab. They just stopped using. They have the mental health issue. The place needs to get their reimbursement from insurance, so they got to diagnose right away. That doesn't allow time.
so that's another thing. I don't agree with that part at all. So, like, my philosophy with mental health is, and the addiction, like I said, preferably someone will stop using drugs. And then after 3 months, 6 months, whatever underlying conditions are still there, if they're still there, they probably need to be addressed. For some people it might be anxiety, for some people it might be depression, etc. And so you see a lot of people right now out there being mental health advocates. There's a lot of people being addiction advocates.
Yeah, peer support specialists and so on, yes.
What are your opinions about all those guys?
I think there's a place for it. Ironically, I first heard about certified peer support specialists when I was living in Oklahoma in 2013. I knew somebody that was one. And now there's a whole lot more of it because of the opioid epidemic. I think it's a good ancillary support for medical staff, because when I went to school as a physician assistant, I was 43, so the average age of the class was 23. And I had already had a career as an addiction therapist. So when I would go on my various rotations, psychiatry, behavioral health, or ER, or different areas, often the doctors would have me go in and talk to the people who had the mental health or addiction issue because they knew I understood.
I do think the people that have been there, whether it's with mental health, addiction, or both, they can help people in a way that people who have never experienced it just can't. Because they can't identify, they can't relate completely. They can, maybe they knew someone personally in their life, and so they know how it looks from the outside. But to actually experience it is a whole different ballgame. And I think, like, in addiction, I see a lot of people that are really trying to help everyone. They're really trying to save others. And I think there's a line that gets crossed, though. Like NA says, a program of attraction rather than promotion. And I think that's the line a lot of these advocates can kind of cross, where they almost try to do more work for the person than the actual person themselves is doing. And that turns into a disaster, because you can't help anyone that doesn't want to help themselves.
Because, even in writing up a treatment plan, you're taught, if you can write anything all day long, but if your client or patient doesn't want to follow it, it's useless.
Yes.
So you've got to work it out with the person. They have to want to be a part of that and participate in it.
Because I see, like, a lot of people, they try to go out there and scoop them off the street, stop them, try to fix, manage, and control them, which are also just manifestations of clean addiction, I would say. Like, you happen to be clean. But to me, it's like the best thing to do for mental health and addiction is just to provide the services and have them be there. Say, listen, these things are here if you want them. And maybe if they're out of rehab, people can go and speak and talk to them, but really put it on them. Like, when they want to get better, let them do the footwork, let them do the actions. And it's like they say in NA2s, right? A sponsor is supposed to match your effort. Not do more, match the effort. And I think that's the best way to go. What do you think?
I also will sometimes on Facebook read how people have gone out there and tried to help someone and have invested all this energy, and then the person doesn't follow through, and then they get angry And to me, that's letting your ego get in the way. It's not about that. You planted the seed, you showed them the way. Now, maybe they will get it down the road, or maybe they'll want it down the road. They don't right now. But that's not a reflection on me or on anyone trying to help them. You're doing your part.
Right.
We can't get anybody clean. We can't get anybody hot.
Right. And I think sometimes I even sound cold, I think, saying it that way, where I feel like it does kind of seem callous. But at the same point, I still do think it's the only way. You can't help others that don't want to help themselves, so you just give them the opportunity to make the choice on their own. Because when they make the choice, they have the freedom to decide without being pushed or controlled or manipulated to do so. The decision will stick a lot of times more. And I think they talk about that a lot in therapy too, where you don't want to tell someone what to do. You want to make it so that they think it's their own idea. Right. And they'll be much more likely to adhere to the plan if it comes out to be their idea. And that's my plan so to continue with my ideas with mental health and addiction, it's like I think some people certainly need medicines, prescription medications, etc. And it really helps them. Me, I take a lot of supplements and things, and for me, that's been enough. That's all I've needed is that. But I don't begrudge anyone what they do, whether it's you need prescription medication, okay. You want to take supplements, okay. Or maybe you don't need anything. Maybe you just eat well, sleep well, have a good exercise program, and have some sort of spirituality or religion or church or yoga or meditation, and that's all you need. I don't know. I don't care what people do as long as it works for them.
And then there are people I notice in the program itself sometimes, and I don't mean to sound this way, they themselves stigmatize mental health. It's like, that's all right, I'll admit I'm an addict, but don't tell me I'm crazy. And, some people go through years in the program and they're clean, but they're still unhappy because they do have an underlying mental health issue they don't want to look at. Or there are other people who will tell people, stop taking your meds, it's mood altering. Not all the meds are mood altering. It's mood stabilizing. It first gives the person a leg up to try to get clean and try to recover because they have to get through getting over the mental health symptoms.
So you found the prescription medications that ended up working for you? Is it multiple things or just one thing?
It's a couple of things.
Couple things. So what would you say to people right now who are maybe struggling with a bipolar type issue, and maybe they think there's no hope right now, or maybe they think they can't get better, nothing's going to work for them because they've tried things already and just nothing's worked? So would you have any suggestions for them?
I see that almost as a symptom of the illness too, because the illness can be self-defeating.
Sure.
I often recommend people get a psych evaluation. Just get evaluated, see. If you don't like that, get a second opinion. But see what's going on, because there might be something underlying that's happening. And if you can walk around the rest of your life being unhappy and trying to fight it, or go see, find out.
I like what you just said there, because I think people become addicted to their struggle too. If they're not sick, who are they?
That's a good point.
If they don't have that thing to complain about, or the woe's me, or the depression, or whatever it is, like they don't know who they are anymore. That's their identity. And so I think people do become addicted to that, and they get afraid of responsibility, which is really the fear of success, right? Fear of responsibility.
Right.
And people get stuck. It's more comfortable for them, the familiar pain is more comfortable than whatever's on the other side of their mental illness or addiction problem. And I think for a lot of people, it really gets in the way, and they don't know how to overcome that, because then they would have to do things. They'd have no excuses anymore, right?
That's right. And people fear the responsibility or the commitment because they think it's going to be too hard or it's going to be too much. And not often just doing one little thing. It's like, say the house is a mess and you just feel bad because your environment is messed up. So you think, I have to do the whole thing at once. And you just start with a little bit, one corner of one room, and just work your way. And I think it's the same, in commitment or accountability. Just start small. Start small. And that one little factor is motivating.
Right.
Absolutely. I can remember being so depressed I didn't even want to get out of bed to shower. It was like monumental. And then, okay, just do a little laundry or just do something to try to feel like you're getting ahead.
Now, did you experience suicidal idealizations and things along those lines?
I've had that in my past. Where I didn't understand what I've been reading, they say at least a medical school class a year commits suicide in this nation that's a physician. In other words, there's about 250 to 500 students in a class each year. About that many physicians or medical practitioners commit suicide a year. And, it's a matter of, kind of losing my train of thought, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
And it happened to me where I was so stressed out when I was working all the time, I thought it was depression. I'm like thinking this, but I was functional, and I'm thinking it's depression that's causing me to feel suicidal because I moved out of New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. I was working in the Midwest. I didn't know anybody, although the people were friendly. And I have come to read lately that it's really the stress of the job, worrying about people's lives, worrying about doing it right, having to see all death or whatever, especially now with the virus. That's causing people to harm themselves because they can't take the stress.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily depression.
And I think that comes down to coping mechanisms, right? We still need, once we get our lives in order, we still need to have coping mechanisms. And they're certainly not going to alleviate the fact that life has problems and difficulties. They're never going to go away. And so I think eventually we just got to learn how to handle them. We got to learn how to handle them in a more productive manner without having to run away and escape to addiction land or whatever it may be that people's vices. And while we're on the topic of addiction here too, what are your thoughts on MAT, the medically assisted treatment?
Okay. Well, I started seeing all the discussions a few years ago. And at first, I kind of thought, no, a person should be clean. If they're off the opiate, what do you need the substitute for? You're clean now. Go ahead and do what you have to do. But there's so much relapse that occurs in the post-acute withdrawal phase that they can't get over the hump. And that helps them get over the hump. It doesn't necessarily have to be for life. It may not be for life. And I believe there's a number of people that if they keep coming to the fellowships and the 12-step programs long enough, they might want abstinence. But keep the door open for them. Don't scare them off. Let them keep coming. Let them learn what they need to. Some will eventually want to get off the mat. Others may not be able to. But, we're dealing with understanding that addiction has many components, and one size fits all is not the answer. And I know the terminology nowadays is multiple pathways. But if it's working for the person and they're living a productive life and they're able to get on with their life and do what they have to do, let them do what they need to. Eventually they may come to other conclusions.
I agree with that. I think there's a lot of judgmental people that go to fellowships, etc., and they really condemn it, and they really get caught up on the argument you see is, oh, is it clean or is it not clean? And to which, since I don't go to there anymore, I think, who cares whether it's clean or not clean? That's my opinion now. And I think MAT can be a very useful bridge for some people. And who am I to say, if something's working for someone, maybe they're on Suboxone, maybe they're on methadone, I don't care what it is. If they want to stay on it for a while, because it's helping out their life and maybe becoming more socially acceptable, as they would say, and they'd also say, again, that's not recovery, but it is still a step in the right direction. And I think if that's what they want to do, then so be it. But then I also think, in some cases, the MAT actually medicates a mood disorder as well. That when someone gets clean, and then all of a sudden they don't have their drugs, they don't have their self-medications anymore, they experience whatever anxiety, depression, or mood disorder they have, except times 10. And so they don't realize they're mentally ill yet, so they go right back to using drugs. But I think MAT can have the dual purpose. It can soothe some of those things out, right? And then, again, if you get off the MAT, you still might have the same issue. You might, okay, you got rid of your Band-Aid, you got rid of your self-medication for anxiety, depression, whatever, and now you're left with you again. And so you either got to find prescription medication that works or something. And I think that's the issue for a lot of the people, is that they think they shouldn't be on anything. And since anything like that can be mind altering, they don't want them to be on it. But it's like, I think a lot of people just have the wrong goals. And I think too many people just have ultimately being clean as like the best goal. And that's not necessarily my best goal anymore. I feel like happiest, healthiest version of myself is what my goal is for me. And for some people, if that means they drink once in a while, okay, I don't really care. If they want to smoke weed because it really helps them, I don't really care. If you can be honest with yourself, that's the big thing though, be honest with yourself and say, okay, this is what I do and it works for me, then great.
And then there are people who will say, hey, look, I came in with a habit and I'm abstinent and I got all these years and I can do it, you can do it. But some people can't, like you said, some people can't get over that hump. And the idea, that's wonderful. So maybe 5 or 10% of the people on the streets have been able to get clean through complete abstinence. But what about maybe 40 or 50% who died because they didn't have that back then? Right. What about that other percentage who never could get it? But we didn't care about it. It was not that we didn't care about it, we didn't know about it because there was no awareness of it. And people will say, yeah, but they had methadone back then and blah, blah, blah. But now, there's different pathways. I think the whole medical field has new evidence-based medicine based on this. But the idea is, yes, you got abstinent and others got abstinent, but what about that handful that didn't? And what maybe today they are? We never consider that.
I always feel like they should all just be loving people through it. Right? Say, hey, listen, we're not going to judge you. We're going to be here for you no matter what you decide. And I'd say going to meetings and being on something like Suboxone or methadone is a million times better than not going to meetings and being on drugs, like heroin or whatever. So why not help them and have like the branch there and stop worrying so much about the clean time thing? And I think the clean time thing, especially for the people with like decades clean, like that's like their big ego thing, right? This is what it gives them their sense of importance. I got 20 years clean. And they would feel if they lose their clean time, now all of a sudden it's like an ego death. Oh, they don't want to have that ego death. And so I just don't know if that's the best way to look at the world, though. I think everyone should look at it as, I'm being a hypocrite by saying this part, but by saying that I'm saying I know what's best. But I don't know really what's best, but I think everyone should just say whatever works for everyone else. That's it.
And I've met people on both ends of the spectrum. I've met people I know have abused their Suboxone. I know they're abusing whatever they have. But I've also met people that you wouldn't even know they were on it.
Yeah.
They're working, they go to therapy, they're raising families. You would never guess it if they didn't tell you. And, it's like you just said, maybe it's more about the recovery than the abstinence.
I can see that. You ever heard of Cradle?
Yes, I have. Yes.
I take that.
I've heard of that.
I take that, and I don't think anyone would really know unless I told them that I do. But to me, along with the other supplements that I take, it's really helped me night and day. So if I were to go to AA or NA today, they'd tell me, you're not clean. And to which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them, but I don't care. It's like, I know me. I know how I am now, and I know how I was when I was not on anything at all. And even with the supplements and things, this wasn't quite enough. I wasn't able to be the happiest, healthiest version of myself. Unlike now, where I feel like I am. And so I just do it for me now. I do what I need to do for me. And I think more people are becoming understanding of it now than ever. There was a time before, though, where people would be really judgmental, really critical. And I just don't think that serves anyone.
I think the bottom line, too, they say don't just work the steps, work the traditions. And we have no opinion on outside issues. So it's not my place to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. I can tell you what worked for me, I can tell you what I do,
Right.
But it's really not for me to beat you over the head and say you have to do it my way. So if something's working for you and that's what you want to do, now if you walk into an NA meeting, raise your hand and say I'm on Cradle, maybe they will tell you you're using and you're not clean, you can't share today. But if you're going about your life on a daily basis and you're not causing harm to anyone and you know your motivations for taking it, then that may be a difference.
Yeah, I think there's benefits. Like if I were to go to meetings, but I don't. I don't even have the issue because I don't go. But I just live my life and I try to be the best person I can be, get a little better each day. I believe a lot in positive self-talk, writing affirmations, sleep, diet, and exercise. That just works for me. And so the community piece of an AA, NA though, that is really helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's their community. They have goals that are similar. And it's a good thing. It's an ingredient of a happy life for everyone. Everyone needs a community.
Where you're going to meet recovering people, that's a start.
Yes.
Because I see so many people posting even on Facebook, I'm so lonely now, I don't have my friends anymore. Yeah, but you meet new friends. You'll meet new recovering friends.
Absolutely.
It takes time.
Right, and you just got to find what avenue is going to be best for them. And maybe AA or NA isn't the best avenue for everyone, but for anyone it works for, I say awesome, and keep on going. This is whatever works for you. And you had mentioned before, you were in the addiction field too?
Yeah.
I was myself for a time. How'd you get into that?
Actually, when I went to undergrad, I was going to become a pharmacist, and I went to pharmacy school for a little bit, but I didn't really like it, so I came back to New Jersey. I was in Stockton, and I took a background in, I had chemistry, a lot of chemistry, but I also took a background in liberal arts and so on. So I was working in journalism for about a year. That's what I studied. But I had a friend who was working for IHD when it was John Brooks. Well, now it's John Brooks when it was IHD. He was a prevention counselor. And he got me on board with that. And eventually I became a residential counselor. And then I went on to Seabrook and helped open their IOP program.
That's right. Seabrook.
Yeah, in Atlantic City I helped with their outpatient back then. And that's what got me in the addictions field. And then down the road, I thought, well, insurances are now requiring master's degrees. They want MSWs for reimbursement. But I don't want to go on for the MSW because I already know a lot of it. I'm not trying to be egotistical here. I mean, I worked in it. I know a lot of this stuff. Let me go on with something I don't know as much about. So I went on to become physician assistant because at one point I actually met a patient who was inpatient at Ancora for a number of years because of a thyroid issue. They found out it was his thyroid, and all of a sudden he was able to be released. So I said, well, a lot of this mental health is also systemic. It's what's going on physically in the body. Let me learn both parts, and then I can, maybe do psychiatry. And that's what I did. I went on and became a psychiatric PA.
What are your thoughts on the originating of mental illness? Do you think it's purely environmental, purely biological, a combination of both?
Both. I think it's both.
I think so.
Like the narcissistic brain, I believe they're born with anomalies in the brain. They have a difference in the shape and size of the memory area, the emotion center, where self-esteem and empathy is located, information processing. Some are born that way, so then that's a genetic component because the genes are expressing that way. And then some are a nurture component because they grow up in a household with a trauma.
You seem to know a lot about the narcissist type stuff.
I've been studying this for a few years because
Okay.
when I got to, I'm in Trenton, when I got to Trenton, I had to live the street life with the mission. And there's a lot of wheeling, dealing, and narcissistic behavior among people on the streets.
Sure.
I had to learn that was a steeper learning curve than med school because it's survival, and I had to learn how to handle that. I started reading about toxic people, about empaths, about how to protect my energy, how to set boundaries.
How did you learn to do that? Because I think that's a big one that a lot of people struggle with, especially as empaths.
I had trauma therapy, and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, teaches a lot about grounding and a lot of the skills, emotion regulation. So I had kind of living among narcissistic personalities.
Right.
I had to learn.
I know they say DBT is great for BPD now. It's the only thing they say that actually helps them and actually can push people towards recovery.
It was originated for the bipolar, the borderline. It was originated for borderline, but now they use it in bipolar, they use it in trauma. They found that it works for a lot of things.
So what did you find useful about DBT? What did you learn there?
Well, for one thing, about how to calm my emotions, so a lot of self-soothing, how to reframe how in cognitive behavioral therapy, how to reframe how I think of situations.
Okay, let's dive into these two a little deeper then. The self-soothing piece is something I struggle with too. What are your methods of that?
Sometimes it's just stopping a minute to breathe. Like, you get so hyped up, you breathe too fast, or you stop breathing certain breaths.
Right.
And how to learn how to breathe. A lot of spirituality involved. Like I believe in angels. I have a lot of spirituality.
Sure.
Calming me. Sometimes just cuddling with my cat.
Oh, that's a big one. Well, there's all sorts of animal therapies now too. Equine therapy, dog therapy, and cats. Like there's something about animals that they do really help a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's something in the purring. Even the purring is healing.
Oh, absolutely. And so you've also mentioned the reframing piece. Are you able to, what's an example of, say, maybe something you would reframe, to be more conducive?
I think it's like, for example, I was going through some stuff for a while and I thought I was being tortured and God was cursing me and, why is this all happening to me? And of course, when you do that, you're all caught up in the negative anyway and you don't see the positive.
Sure.
And then I had to begin to understand, no, God is loving. He is not doing this to you. There's a lesson in this, and there'll be a blessing in this. And people would tell me that, and I wouldn't believe it. But one lady once said to me, it's not good enough to believe in God, you have to trust in God. Put your life in his hands and trust him. He doesn't want to hurt you. He wants what's best, and he's got a plan. And I'd start to see these plans unfold. They call them synchronicities. Things would just start to fall in place. And then I started to understand that I got a better framework.
I've had that experience too with the higher power thing. Although, right now I feel like higher powers and God, especially religion right now, is getting more hate than it's ever gotten before. People say things like, oh, go talk to your cloud, daddy. I hear a lot of people say it like that. And it's really condescending and patronizing, really. They think it's like, I guess they consider it a weakness or something. I don't know what they think, but I find it pretty hateful that they say those things.
It's because everyone has a right to believe as they want. If you want to believe, believe. It's not my place to say. Then certain people, it's, oh, that's hocus pocus. Right now, and I'm going to say this, I see conspiracy theories going around. I don't believe a lot of those conspiracy theories, but you want to believe it, believe it. I look at the science. I think a lot of people don't really understand the science. So the brain looks for things to understand, and it conjures up and formulates these explanations.
Sure.
And then we believe them.
Well, I think what you said just a minute ago about like choosing to trust and how you interpret things is a huge, huge thing. I think a lot of people, they get caught up on that part. Like, it's similar to life happens for us, not to us.
Right.
Like, is that true?
That's great. I like that.
I don't really know. But if we decide to act like it's true, and we choose to act like it's true, it can change everything. It's just a little cognitive reframe where
Exactly.
it just gets you thinking in a different direction. And I think, why not try to do that? Even if it's not happening for us. Like, all we can do is try to work with what happens anyway. Why not try to look at the positive of it? Why not try to make something productive happen out of it? What's the negative of doing that? And I don't think there is one. Like, there's no reason to not do it that way.
And I found where God's will is concerned, a lot of times if I get out of the way, and I've heard all my life, turn it over, get out of the way, ever since I was in the program.
Sure.
I never could understand that. If I get out of the way and let him do what he has to do, it works better than anything I could have imagined. But if I try to control it, a lot of times it gets messed up.
Sure.
It reminds me of the story I once heard in the program where a little boy gives his father a toy to fix for him. And the boy keeps touching it, and the father says, "Stop, take your hands off it. I can't fix it if you don't let me." And God's saying, hands off, let me do my will. And it'll work for you. And I found it does.
I find my struggle with that is, and still to this day in some cases, finding the right avenues to put the footwork in. Because I think God helps those who help themselves. But finding the areas to put the footwork in, that seems to be the hardest part for me. So I guess what are your thoughts on finding the right ways and areas to put the footwork in? Like, how do you normally go about doing that?
Well, I know it's easy to ask early on, like in spirituality, how do you know what God's will is? How do you get a sense that is God's will, what you're feeling or what you're thinking? Well, for one thing, I think we develop a better intuition. And if we're doing the right thing for the right reasons and our conscience is clear and we know that it's the next right thing, it probably is within the will of God. And so that's how I begin to understand that. Because, if I'm angry with someone and I'm thinking, well, God's will is for me to do something vindictive, well, that's not really God's will. God's will is let him handle it. And then sometimes, usually down the road, I'll see, wow, he did that way better than I could have. I never imagined that.
Okay, that's cool. I like that. And so, let's last thing about the recovery part here. So you've obviously had to work on defects and shortcomings, etc. What has been your experience with doing that?
Well, I think early on we're resistant. Somebody will point something out and it's like, no, that's not me, I don't do that. And then I had to learn, like, what's my part in things and take a look at what my side of it was. And it doesn't hurt to maybe take a look at it and say, could I have done that? Is it possible I act like that? And then maybe I do, and be willing to look at what I can do to change it.
Sure. I think another reframe that I've learned about shortcomings and defects are calling them survival mechanisms and figuring out what they were doing for me.
Right.
So for example, like jealousy was a big one of mine. And dishonesty about how I was feeling was another big one. But I had to ask myself, what is jealousy doing for me? What survival mechanism is it helping me enforce? And the only thing I could come up with was, it's allowing me to not be happy because I have a fear of being happy. And that's what I think would be, like, people get caught up in their struggle, same thing, right? So I have a fear of having to be happy and not being able to be like the critical or the negative / depressed type person if I don't have those excuses anymore. And jealousy allows me to fall back on those things, right? Because what is jealousy? It's comparing. It is seeing what someone else has and getting annoyed by it. Or in a romantic sense, it's, do you think that if someone loves someone else or loves something else, is taking away from your love? It's like that win-lose type mentality in there too. And I think that's all harmful. So I had to see that. Like, once I saw jealousy as a survival mechanism, I was like, I'm responsible for my happiness. No one else is, right? If I had to rely on some woman or something for my happiness, I'm up the creek. And so it gave me that mindset where I got to just work on me. I got to work on being happy with just me. And it's still hard though. Like, when I was going to the meetings and things, I had, like, the drug thing. That was the easiest thing to stop, in my experience. But then I noticed I would do other process addictions, like gambling. And then it would be relationships, caffeine, cigarettes, etc. The one I could never quite completely overcome was the love addiction type one, where just being able to not look at all for relationships of any kind. Not going a while without doing it, but I've always gone back to it eventually. And part of me thinks like maybe there's a layer of spiritual development that I'm just kind of stuck on maybe, and I need to get there. And I've been stuck on this one for years really. And I think it's hard because part of it is, hey, we're humans, we're biologically driven to want to reproduce, to want to have relationships and community. And then here I am telling myself I shouldn't be. I have to like turn that all off. But then the other thing I find that happens is I stay away from dating for a couple months. And I find once I go back, it's like the same thing. It's like, you can't look at it as like one's too many, 1,000's never enough, because in looking at relationships that way, it doesn't really work, right? Because you ultimately would maybe want a relationship, but if you think of it as one's too many, 1,000's never enough, then you're going to be up the creek. And so I guess I'm just talking in circles about it, but it's a struggle. How have you worked on the relationship thing?
I never was one who dated a lot. And when I was married about 14 years, but he wasn't narcissistic, he wasn't toxic. We got along, we were like a partnership, we could communicate, we got along. But we grew apart as far as I went on for the career, and I think he thought maybe I was going to get too career-oriented, wouldn't give enough time to him or to the relationship. And so we kind of parted ways. And that was back in 2005, and I haven't actually dated or been in a relationship since. But I'm okay with me. I like my independence. I like my time to myself. I actually enjoy my own company. And I think that if it's meant to be, it will happen.
Right.
It will occur if it's meant to be. But in the meantime, I'm happy with myself.
I find for me, I oscillate between the two. Like there's times when I don't think about women or dating at all, and I have so many good things going on in my life that I don't even have time to think about it. And that's usually my indicator to myself to know I'm in a good spot. I'm not even thinking about dating or women. And then there's other times where I'm maybe not as fulfilled from what's going on in my own life, and that's when I'll catch myself lusting or wanting to go back in that direction. And so I guess for me, it's just never like a permanent solution. It's like a daily reprieve kind of thing. And if you get a few daily reprieves in a row, a few months worth, you're doing pretty good. But I just try not to beat myself up about it if I go back around and say, I'm human, but notice what you're doing. Like I gotta be aware of what I'm doing, and then try to go focus back on my own life. And
I find just even in day-to-day relationships in general with people, I have to look for the red flags too.
Absolutely.
You know, it's important for me now to understand what a toxic relationship would be, because it drains your energy, it drains your emotions, it's self-defeating. So in learning about this narcissistic behavior, I learned a lot about how to handle red flags and setting boundaries. And I see people so often just jumping from one toxic to the next, to the next, to the next. You have to take time to get to see what are the red flags and what are you looking for.
Sure.
And know yourself. If you know yourself and you're okay with your own defects of character, your own assets, you know what you're bringing to the table. And if you want somebody to bring something healthy to the table, you have to bring it too.
right.
So it's important to learn.
That's very true too. And I think subtle differences between healthy people and toxic people are humongous. So like toxic people that display toxic behaviors, often they'll try to win conversations.
Yes.
As opposed to trying to understand one another.
Yes.
And there'll be very little accepting of responsibility or blame amongst people that have toxic behaviors. And they'll gaslight. They'll try to switch the blame back on you. A lot of projections of things that they are doing in their own life that they'll put onto you via jealousies, etc. But those are the main three things. And if they're helpful for me because if I can pinpoint them down, narrow them down to those basic things and say, okay, if this person's trying to win the conversations with me, boom, red flag. Like that's it. They're trying to win the conversation. It's like forget everything they're saying.
Right.
If it's turning into this battle, that's the problem. And I think it's been helpful for me to put them in that kind of category for my own sake. And to notice when I'm doing it myself too, of course.
And of course, boundaries. They violate boundaries too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they get mad at you for enforcing them and say,
Right.
you're narcissistic. And then I've heard an expression that said, when someone gets mad at you for enforcing a boundary, all they're doing is proving why the boundary was needed in the first place. And for me, it's very true. But back to the physician's assistant thing. How long were you a physician assistant for?
Well, I went back to school. I had an undergrad degree. I went back to school in 2003. And I was working as a PA from 2005 to 2014.
Oh, okay, so that's 9 years there.
Yeah, and I was in Minnesota, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania.
So you make a decent salary doing that. What was life like for you doing that?
Well, you never have to worry if you need something. You virtually also, you go into a store and you buy something, you don't have to worry about prices, you don't have to figure out the budgeting. If the end of the month comes, you're not running out of money, because disability income is very little. It's a poverty wage.
And that's what you're on now?
Yeah, and you don't have to always worry financially about what if this or what if I need that. But it's had to teach me how to develop spiritual wealth, because I figure if I want financial wealth right now, I better put my mindset in the right place.
I think that's a great lesson to learn for everyone, regardless of what that financial situation is. I mean, it couldn't hurt, whether you're wealthy or poor or whatever it is. But how did you go from being a physician's assistant to where you are now on disability?
Well, mental health issues were getting in the way, and some addiction issues. And I was working in Minnesota, and it was decided that my license would be, temporarily suspended for a little bit until I got treatment. And then I came to New Jersey, because that's where my family is, so I moved back to Jersey. And I've had some, relapses along the way, so it's not time yet to look into doing that. I don't know if I really want to go back to it even. I'm thinking one of the things I always wanted to do was teach on the college level, and we have a local community college. And I think a lot of people need to learn how to write, because a lot of documentation in every field requires the ability to write. So I'm thinking of maybe either tutoring or teaching an adjunct course at the local college.
Sounds pretty good. Now, were you struggling with mental health and addiction while going to school to be a physician's assistant, or did it come after?
The irony is I was on no medication. I was married at the time, so I had a lot of support with him. He was very helpful. And actually, I was on no medication. I would drink a cup of coffee in the morning. That gave me a little energy for class, and you have to study all the time, and that was about it. But other than that, no, I wasn't on any medication. I would take melatonin for sleep balance, because sometimes I was getting 4 or 5 hours sleep, but I seemed to, it was good concentrated sleep.
So the addiction and mental health stuff came back around while you were a physician's assistant?
Yeah, it was after he left, and then
that happens a lot that way. When the relationship goes, and then you're left with just you.
Right.
And for some people, it can be a real issue at that point. So what happened with that? How'd you swing the corner again and to get out of those issues?
Well, after he had left, there was nothing, I had no children or anything, and I was living in an apartment, so nothing was anchoring me. I was living in Philadelphia, and I started getting notices in the mail, and I would call up these places, and they would say, well, it would be like for a nurse practitioner, and they'd say, we'll take a physician assistant, and I would go out and, start interviewing, and that's how I kind of got back on my feet, was just staying active work-wise.
Okay. And so for people who struggle with addictions and mental health, maybe they're in a good profession like that, what are your suggestions to them?
Well, it's really, the bottom line is we have to know ourselves. It really is knowing ourselves and taking time with yourself, seeing what you like, what you don't like, what you can tolerate, what you don't tolerate in life, getting a good sense of self. And then you'll have a better idea of what you like in life and what you want to do.
Sure, that makes sense to me. And so what are the biggest discrepancies between like when you made over a 6-figure income as a physician assistant and now being on disability income as you are now? What have you noticed?
There is a massive class difference in this nation. There really is. I should write a book. There is a major difference from going from $125,000 a year. You sit in the dental chair. Oh, great patient. We can do your whole mouth over for you. You go to the doctor. Any med you want, we'll give you. Anywhere you go, it's like, oh, this lady's got money. We can get her money. Let's get her to do this and that, and we'll treat her like gold. Then all of a sudden, you're indigent. You don't have a dime in your pocket. You can't even afford to take a bus. I lost 85 pounds walking all over the place. And all of a sudden, you don't matter. Get out of here, you're loitering. Move on, move on. Oh, you think you're important? And when you're a physician assistant, you go to the head of the line. Get in the back of the line, go ahead. And it's just a whole different feel. It's a whole different way that you're treated. The whole system is completely different.
I think...
This is my soapbox, so I don't even want to...
No, that's fine. I think discrimination against the poor is the worst discrimination this country experiences. And I do think it's worse than racism even. Because I think, unfortunately, for people of color, a lot of times, they are also more likely to be poor. And hence, they're getting the double edge of what you just mentioned. But I think the poor, the police, and everyone treats poor people differently. They treat you like you're guilty, they treat you like you're worthless, they treat you as if you're inferior. They just treat you in all of these negative ways. And I think that's something that, as a country, America, somehow we got to do something about. I'm not sure how you... Actually, I do think I know how. education is how you're going to do it. Fiscal education in particular.
Education is how you work through the class system in America. I was working as the addictions therapist. I was only making $25,000 a year. I only ever stood to make 3% cost of living every year, which is like another $750. It'll take forever just to get to $30,000. So one day I said to myself, wait a minute, you can triple your income at least if you just go back to school for a couple of years and become a physician assistant. You will triple your income with a master's degree. And sure enough, that's what happened. That's how you get through the class system in America, is through education. And people might say, but I can't afford that. Well, there's loans, there's grants, you can always work that out down the road. But that's one of the ways. And I know people might be watching this and say, you know, lady, okay, you ended up poor, but you're white, you're still not getting treated like we're getting treated down here, and it's the God's honest truth, I'm not. I can walk on the street with some African-American young friends, cops will want to stop them, want to check them out, want to frisk, want to search for a warrant. I never get that. I walk in stores, it's all right, give us your backpack, you can't walk around the store with the backpack, okay, fine, but nobody's following me around. I can go downtown and do like this, and they'll think I'm a state worker, and that I'm not even from the poverty class. But that's a shame, because even though I'm living in the poverty, still there's white privilege. And I'm realizing
there certainly is a white privilege in America. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day by Sam Harris, and he was saying how, like, a white person actually, this surprised me, is statistically more likely to be killed by a cop than a black person, for one. And then two, if a black person is to be killed, it's more likely to be a black officer or a Hispanic officer that doesn't. And what he was trying to emphasize was the fact that the media is not doing any favors right now to the country and their sense of order. Because like, we're one more black person being killed by a police officer video away from complete chaos and disorder. And here's the thing, though. There's going to be another one. Because here's why I say so. I say so because, say, hypothetically, you get rid of racism in this country. You still may have police officers killing people for other reasons besides racism. Maybe, like I said, it's discrimination of the poor. Maybe it's just a bad cop. Maybe it's abuse of power. But it's going to happen. And so I saw this statistics the other day. It said a person gets killed in 1 out of every 10,000 arrests and 1 out of every 50,000 police encounters. So, hypothetically, I think that should be reassuring to some people, I would hope. And this is another thing I think. I think that if you really wanted things to be better, you would say things like this, like, okay, regardless of the color of your skin, when you're with a cop and they want to place you under arrest, don't resist arrest. I think if you want to save lives, that's what you'd say. Now, I think there's a big bunch of people who don't want to say that, though, because ultimately I don't think that's really their goal. The really goal is to get power in a movement, I think. And to actually have something that works, which would be don't resist. I don't think that's what they want. And I think the powers to be like this divisiveness, right? So it's CNN, MSNBC versus Fox, right? There's divisiveness everywhere. And I just don't think it's serving anything. And there's going to be another video like this at some point. And what are we going to do as a country when we see it?
And I even saw on a Facebook post today, somebody posted, well, this African-American police officer killed this white person. Why aren't we talking about that? Why isn't that? Because it's disproportionately different from African-Americans. They say it's about 13% in the nation, but a great many more in jails than you see white people. So there's still a discrimination going on.
Well, I'd say that's the other thing he touched on in this thing. He goes, not as much as you would think. Because like 13% of the population, but they'll commit over 50% of the murders. And so there's going to be police officer attention on people that are committing more crimes. And I think it becomes a chicken or the egg issue. It's like, well, what came first? Did them committing crimes come first? Or them being discriminated against for being black come first? Or maybe from being poor come first? I don't know.
The whole defunding concept is, if you run into an African-American on the street, you think he's selling drugs or whatever, and you throw him in jail, maybe it's time that the social service system does something to try to help educate them. And because of the felony records from being thrown in prison or thrown in jail, they can't get housing like they need, they can't get certain jobs like they need, so now they're behind the 8 ball. So the legal system, the policies need to be changed. And, you know, or even just the idea of homeless guys sleeping in the park. Do the police need to arrest them? Call the local shelter and have them send out a social worker to get them housing for the night, or try to get them housing permanently.
Well, I think education, like you said. So you get someone the education to be able to make an income. And even something as simple from like in high school, learning to invest. and continually doing it on a regular basis, especially when your bills are low or you have no bills. Like, you can really try to get ahead doing that. And I think that kind of education could go such a far way. And I do agree. I don't think treating people like criminals is the best thing to do. I think, but then here's the other side. What do you do with the people that don't want to get better, like we talked about in the beginning? Because there's a lot of people who just don't want to get better.
You see that with the, I never realized till I read an article on that a few years ago, but it's true, you see that while you wonder, why don't they go to a shelter? Why are they on the streets just acting like that?
A lot of them want to be there.
Yeah, because for them being in an apartment is claustrophobic or uncomfortable. A lot of them don't want to take the meds, they're not comfortable with the meds, so you can't get them to settle down and think clearly. But when I read that, I was kind of, maybe I sound naive, but I was kind of shocked when I read that there's this percentage of people who walk the streets, and I know some of them here in the city, who don't want to be bothered with, don't give me the housing, don't give me the meds, don't give me any of your stuff. I don't want to be bothered. I like my life. This is how I want to live. This is good enough for me.
Well, I think it needs to be addressed because it's part of the reality. Like, every part of the reality needs to be addressed. And if a reality is people don't want help, I have the same experience. A lot of people I knew who were homeless, they just wanted to use drugs. And so they were there. They had options to stay at places. They had options to do this, options to do that. But the condition was you just can't be doing heroin. And they said, well, screw that. I'm not going to do that because I can't do heroin.
That's like the local shelter. You have to be in by 4 o'clock. It used to be, I don't know if the rules are like that now. You had to line up and get ready to go to your bed at 4 o'clock. Once you were in, if you left before 8 a.m. the next morning, you're out. You can't come back. And people would be like, 4 o'clock? Man, I want to go get high.
Right.
And they'll go to the abandos, or, and hang out at the abando or hang out somewhere and get high because now you're cutting into, like, because they have an addiction to, you're cutting into the use from 4 p.m. to 8 a.m. They don't want to do that.
Well, this is the thing, though. I think no matter what happens in this world and what kind of policies we have and how good our education is, there will always be a percentage of people who have poor mental health. There will always be a percentage of people who are on drugs, whether they're legal or not. There just will be. And there will be people who are at the bottom of the rungs. And the only way to not have that would be if the government just directly puts money in their pockets via like a universal basic income or like a welfare type thing, right? But other than that, there's always going to be winners, and there's always going to be quote unquote more losers. And like, I think people look at things and they'll say like, oh, San Francisco has a terrible homeless problem right now. But it's like, how often were those people trying to be helped and they just didn't want to be helped?
And that's another thing.
How do you look at that? How do you do something differently?
That's another thing with the mission, which I was amazed when I was homeless and I lived in the mission, that they actually do offer social services. I think it was just warehousing. You go in there and now what? I have no income, I have nothing, what am I supposed to do? Live here the rest of my life? But they actually helped me get my SSDI. They actually got me into housing. But there are people, they don't keep giving chances 100 times either.
Right.
They'll help you initially. They'll get you what you need. But if you keep messing that up, there's not much else they can do for you anymore.
That's true. I do think we should end the drug war. I do think all drugs should be legal, controlled, and regulated. And that way there will be no more fentanyl and heroin anymore, the thing that's killing most people. And I think, because ultimately I believe in liberty and freedom. I believe that the government should really let us know what we can and cannot put in our bodies. It's if you want to do a drug, I say go do a drug. I don't care. But there will be consequences. Like there'll be, even if there's no legal consequences, there will be consequences of drug use. Via withdrawal, or via blowing your money, or via whatever it is, right? And you still wouldn't be able to drive under the influence, most likely, right? That would still be illegal. And I'm for that, though. And so that's like, I think that would help so much of the drug problem. Legalize. Legalize, and all the money that's put towards the fighting of crime in it, put it towards addiction treatment. Put it towards mental health awareness. Because at the addiction, good story here, but there was a woman who lost her child to an OD. Opiates. And she was focusing on the prevention model, which is, she gave an analogy of people are falling in a river, okay, and the river is addiction. And then they get caught and they get rescued from the river. And the prevention model says, why not, instead of rescuing people from the river, find out why they're even falling in the river to begin with? And so, in my own case, and it sounds like in your case too, mental health was the reason I fell in the river. I was self-medicating anxiety, mostly anxiety, then depression. And that if I would have worked on that, then maybe I wouldn't have fallen in the river. However, you don't know you're mentally ill though when you are. I didn't know for a long time. It was just my normal reality. I thought everyone was like this. I couldn't tell. I was the last one to know, probably. But when I did finally find out, I was in my late 20s. And then it took me a while to figure it out from there, just from having the awareness of it, right? So, I was saying that story before. I think it was just that, like, the mental health piece, it's just going to be hard. There's always going to be people who struggle with mental health. There's always going to be people that have, like, a depression, whether it's an existential depression, just because life can be struggling and suffering, versus what's a neurological/biological depression, right? Or PTSD from earlier childhood. It's just, there's always going to be issues. And I think it's just our goal. The best we can do is just have the outlets there for them to get help. Whether it's with addiction, you want what we have to offer, you'd be willing to do what we do, blah, 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 kind of thing, right? You want this, here it is. You want mental health treatment, here's psychiatrists. But the big thing with mental health treatment I see right now, I think a lot of psychiatrists are morons. I don't think they know anything. Or they'll say they know some things, but I think they're stupid. And they don't know things about supplements because they're not FDA approved. But why aren't they FDA approved? Because there's no money to be made from supplements, so the pharmaceutical companies don't pay for studies on supplements. They do pay for studies on prescription drugs. And the way I see it is, I think what is already on the earth via supplements and natural things, maybe that's all we need for our mental health. Maybe we don't need all this other stuff in some cases. Now, prescription drugs can help people though. I'm not against it for the ones that do. But I think there's a lot of people who are not being served right now, mental health wise.
There are some psychiatrists that do actually practice some holistics.
Good.
Which is good. And they do realize the importance of vitamin supplementation, or, you know, if you have a vitamin D deficiency, it can lead to, or, you know, some people need fish oil, it does lead to depression. So I do see some of them doing that. One thing I wanted to backtrack on and mention too, I see now where the opioid epidemic is actually going to be beneficial for the Black Lives Matter movement, in that when it hit the suburbs and it started to go into the suburbs, all of a sudden it was no longer about let's throw them in jail, let's get them treatment, let's get them treatment. Now they have to transpose that to the streets. Because technically on the streets, a person gets arrested, it's always going to send them to jail, send them to jail. But some nice kid gets arrested in the suburbs, mom's got money or dad's got money to pay for the lawyers, and then they go to treatment. And it needs to trickle into air. I don't want to use trickle because trickle means it never will happen. It has to be sent into the areas where now that Black
You can see that. You can see the discrepancy between how they treated crack cocaine in the 80s and how they treated it versus how they're treating this more white person affected thing with opiates, right? And when you look at it that way, it does certainly appear to be more racist. And if it wasn't completely racist, it's just a pretty big coincidence that that's how they decided to fight that issue. And so, yeah, that is a legitimate gripe. Absolutely. That was like the Reagan days and the Just Say No to Drugs days. And I don't think that works. I think we've proven it doesn't work. I think we've proven the war on drugs doesn't work either. It's just like, look at prohibition of alcohol in the 20s. Did it work? Yeah. It just created all these illegal avenues for alcohol to be made and sold. And that's really what we have right now with drugs. Same thing.
With addiction, the brain almost uses the drug like it needs food or water or oxygen. So that's all well and good. So say no to oxygen, say no to water, you know, or fluids. My body can't do that. I mean, you're telling somebody who's already caught up, or like bet with your head, not over it. I have to laugh. They're already gamblers, and you're telling them bet with your head, not over it. It's like, it's
sure. Well, I mean, mental health, there will always be people that struggle with mental health too, especially like the borderline personality disorder folks and the narcissistic personality folks. Like, because medicines don't necessarily help them. Like, they could help a little, but the disorders, it's like ingrained in them, right? It's ingrained from childhood, and those kinds of people will just always struggle. Like, and some people can get better, but it seems like the majority don't. Most narcissists never get better because they don't admit they're wrong. They can't take any responsibility. Some borderlines do get better, though, they say. But I guess my point is that there's just always going to be some people who are going to be in a bad spot. It's kind of like a yin and a yang, balance of the force kind of thing.
Yeah,
like,
definitely believe in that.
For every action, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. It's just life. And so I guess my challenge to anyone watching this, or anyone just trying to think about America and what we're doing here, it's like, what's an acceptable amount of people doing drugs? What's an acceptable amount of people with mental health issues? What's an acceptable amount of people killed by police?
That's an interesting question because I love documentaries and I was watching one on food. Peanut butter, there's a certain percentage of bug parts that are allowed in peanut butter to go on the market. So that's an interesting question. That's true. What percentage will society accept that this is what it is? And some people just won't change.
No, they won't. And I think like for every action, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. I think that's something that really need to be cognizant of right now because it's so far true. And I think like for every Antifa, there will be whatever the opposite is on the other side, which is what? Proud Boys or KKK or white supremacists, right? Something. But there will be an equal and opposite reaction. I think we just got to realize that there will always be some things to be concentrated on. They're going to be negative. And I think it just takes a little wisdom to realize no matter what we do, we're not going to completely stop racism. We're not going to completely stop people having problems with drugs. We're not going to completely stop mental health problems. It's just not going to happen. And so how do we proceed knowing it's not going to happen? I think the best we can do in all of these areas, education too, is give them the opportunity to get the help and to change and to do things. That's the best we can do, I think.
And raise the awareness.
And that's awareness is part of all of those things, I think. So, like the person who doesn't have much of an opportunity to live in Trenton or Camden or Kensington, if they just have the education, just see the path, and then be shown the path, what more can you do? You try to give them some safe haven after school programs, because chances are they're from a single parent household, and the father's probably not there, and that becomes even more difficult. But it's like education, realizing that single parent households don't do as well as two parent households. Like it's just, and the kids, the results of those families, they're just not as good. And that's what all the literature says, and that's what all the studies say. And so rather than fight that fact, why don't we try to help that issue out?
I went to a seminar a few years ago that was put on by some of the urban African American organizations here in Trenton, and they said the key thing is opportunity. It's a lack of opportunity in certain communities that keep people from getting ahead. And I have a young friend, he's African American, and we were talking the other day about what's going on with the whole movement now. And he said, if somebody could just give me a leg up, if I could just get an opportunity to get ahead, and somebody would be willing to help me do that. He said the problem in the whole community is we don't have enough people who really give us those opportunities. And as far as I'm concerned, from what I can see, the social service system is broken. A lot of the workers are burned out. It's just too much for them. And that's why I'm wondering, now with the funding and defunding, there needs to be more people working in social services for that to work. And the system itself, its policies need to change.
Sure.
But he said, if I just don't get the opportunity.
Right.
So I think why they do mentoring programs.
The thing, I've done some of that before. I've worked with kids that have been taken by DIPAS, CPS, etc. But I have a hard time deciphering when someone says they don't have enough opportunities. I have to see the situation, because I think every individual situation is a little different. And he might be right, this person, I don't know. But I have to take a look at it and say, okay, he really doesn't have any opportunity. But I think sometimes there might be opportunities he's just not aware of. And hence awareness is key with that. And there's other times where it's I feel like I can't talk about the issues of CPS, of social services, of addiction treatments until you're at the top of it. And you see everything from as you're looking at the top of the mountain and down. You see the funding, you see the issues, you see the employees, you see burnout. But you gotta have all the facts to really make an informed decision and an informed, opinion on what to do best. And so I think if I were to see the tops of social services, CPS, addiction places, psychiatry places, mental health places, then I could make an informed decision from there. Okay, this is what we can do to improve. But as of right now, anything I would say is just a guess, because I don't know exactly what's going on.
You don't know all the variables, you can't see the whole picture.
And I say this way because I was working with the mayor of Wildwood last October, and we're trying to help him get reelected, which unfortunately he did not get reelected. But I asked him a question. I said, what is the biggest difference being on your side of the table here versus all the complaints I hear and what people are telling me about what's going on in Wildwood? And he would say, it's like a mechanic. We're under the hood. We actually see the issues. We see what's going on. We have all the information. But the people who are not the mechanic, they don't have all the information. They don't have all the variables. They don't see. So they're not getting the full picture. And I think that's so true with every area right? Until you're under the hood, you're seeing all the nitty gritty, you see the funding, until you're actually the leader in that area, you can't really say for sure you know anything, especially if you have no experience with the stuff. It's like, how would you know anything to do? But I say, like, I think if I were to go, this may be one reason I want to be in politics one day, is I want to look at all these areas and say, okay, I see this, I see everything now. Now what can we do once I see it all? And until I get to that point, I don't feel comfortable saying much because, like I said, we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And that goes for everyone. And so it's interesting to think about because I think these are the issues moving forward here that we're going to be having as a country. The race issues, the mental health issues, the addiction issues, social services, taking kids away from their parents or single parents and taking them from one evil to the next evil. And it's like, how do you do something differently with that? I really don't know. Because would more money get the problem help that? Maybe. I don't know. What would more money do? Give you better trained workers? Give them more time? Give them more activities to do? I don't know. What could it do? Better addiction help for the parents? But for all I know, they're just making the wrong choices. They have every opportunity to do the right things, they're just not. So that's what I say, we don't know.
So it's interesting because we started out with saying mental health, addictions, the movements going on now are all about the individual level, and we're ending up saying, but it's actually a systemic societal issue as a whole.
It is, but I think ultimately, I like the individual thinking of it because the whole is a group of individuals. If we get to the individuals and you tell the individuals, hey, act like you do have opportunity in your life. Act as if you're doing everything in your power to succeed. And I think if you really have that mindset, most people that think they don't have any opportunity would probably discover they do, if they really looked. Now, who am I to say? Maybe they really don't have any opportunity, but I find it hard to believe that they have zero opportunity. There's just something they're not seeing. And here's the other thing though, like, I didn't grow up wealthy. To be poor and then to change classes, it takes a lot of hard work. Like, it's not easy. And you can't do the hard work for anyone else. Like, everyone has to do their own hard work, and some people just aren't going to be willing to do it. But that's just life. Right? That's life. And so there's always going to be some people who are a little more disenfranchised. But I'm big into the individual argument. It's like, yeah, everyone should try to do what's in their circle of influence to do. And if everyone did that, the cumulative effects, the compound effects would be amazing.
If it works. If it works. It's so hard for getting everyone to work together to do that.
Very difficult. Well, I guess we should probably wrap up about it now. Do you have anything else you wanted to tell the audience here before we close?
I just want to thank everyone for listening. I hope I was able to offer some interesting information, and just life is about the daily getting to know ourselves and being willing to do that, no matter how tough it can get. And I know I have my bad days, I have my good days, but then I always have hope it gets better. And I've had to hold on to hope. And I'm just hoping now that the awareness is being raised by everything that's happening. I personally don't think it's any coincidence we have this virus going on. I don't think it's any coincidence that we now have the civil unrest happening. It's meant to be, and it's going to move forward, and something's going to come of this that we're going to learn from.
That's one thing. There's always something to learn from everything. So I absolutely agree with you there. Something to learn, an opportunity, and a meaning that we can assign. And that's for everything that happens in life. I made the acronym LMO. Learning, meaning, opportunity, and everything. Because there always is. Even if it's just something like, we don't want to do this again. There's always something to learn. But anyway, thanks for coming on the show, Marlene. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
And please do leave some comments below what you thought about this video. You liked it, you liked the topics we discussed about, etc. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts. So with that, over and out.